there is a story about a prince. And this prince one day heads out into the jungles of Hindustan, and he is hunting, and he has a whole retinue of people with him. And they have a lot of success. It's a good day. And at the end of the day, they're racing back homeward as fast as they can because night is approaching and they can hear the beasts of the jungle. It's a real thing. But they find themselves lost, and it's getting a little scary. And they race faster and faster and faster, but still have no sense of being anywhere, on the right path home. And they come across this cottage in the forest, and it's shabby. There's a hole in the roof, and there's really not much to it. And the prince gets off his horse, and he heads towards the cottage, and he calls out, "Is there anyone there?" And this hermit comes walking out. And the first thing the hermit says before the prince can say anything else, "Do you need water?" And this is what was foremost in the prince's mind. Besides getting home, if they found a place, they had food with them, they had no water, they were really thirsty. He couldn't believe that this hermit had made this connection. And he said to the hermit, "What are you doing living here? Aren't you afraid of tigers? Aren't you afraid of snakes and the beasts of the jungle?" And the hermit said, "No, the tigers are my pussycats, the snakes are my pets." And right then the prince noticed that this hermit had these two snakes coiled around his neck. And he couldn't believe it, and he looked more closely, and he came toward the hermit, and the snakes, the cobras, these were cobras, and they reared up, expanded their hoods, and hissed at him. And the hermit whispered to him and said, "Shh, shh, shh, quiet." And they quieted down. And then right then this big tiger comes into the cottage through the doors that don't exist. And they're horrified. They're about to run for their lives. And the hermit says, "Don't worry, don't worry." And he just pets the tiger on the top of the head. And he's subdued and slunks out into the forest. And the prince is just beside himself. And the hermit offers them fruit, offers them water. They stay the night in relative security because the hermit is there. Evidently, he can tame the wilds. And the next morning, the prince wants to thank him. And he's so grateful. He's saved their lives. He's fed them. He's been so generous, so very generous. And he said, "I want to give you something. I want to give you this stone. This stone was given to my father by a mystic alchemist. And my father gave it to me. It's worth more to me than my very life. But I'm going to give it to you, and I'm going to give it to you for this year. And I want you to use it to create what you really deserve. It'll turn anything it touches to gold. Turn all these rocks, these stones to gold, and build yourself a big palace." And the hermit really doesn't want it. The prince has said, "This is more than my life." And the hermit doesn't want that stone, but he can't say no. And so he takes it and he sticks it into the folds of his garment. And the prince says, "I'll be back in a year to get it." And so the year goes by and the prince returns. And he's so surprised. Here stands this very same cottage in even worse condition now. He thinks that the hermit is gone or died or something. And he gets off his horse, he goes toward the cottage. "Hello, hello, is there anybody there?" And out comes the hermit. And he says, "What have you done? You haven't done anything. I've given you this stone. It could have created a palace for you. It could have made you the richest person in the world. Why didn't you use it?" And the hermit said, I had no need of it. And the prince said, "I want it back." And he said, "Well, actually, I don't have it." He said, "It must have dropped out of my garment when I went down to bathe just after you left." And the prince fainted to the ground in a swoon. He was overcome. He just couldn't believe he'd lost this. And the hermit said, "Don't worry, let us go down to the river and we'll find it. We'll find it. God will give it to us." And the prince was, "You've got to be crazy. The river, the torrents, the water, but somehow the magnetism of the hermit held them. And they go down there to the water, and the prince says, "Take your handkerchief and lower it into the waters and pray to the Lord of the universe, the giver of all things, to return to you this very same stone." And so the prince did that, and he lowered the handkerchief into the water, he pulls it up, and not only is his stone there, but there are 24 other stones, and they all turn things to gold. And the prince, because he tests them out, and they're all working. And everyone in his group, of course, is thrilled, but the prince is speechless. And he looks at the stones, and he looks at the hermit, he looks back at the stones, he looks at the hermit, and he takes all of them in the cloth, and he bundles it up, and he throws it back into the water. And his group is horrified. And he goes over to the hermit, and he kneels at his feet, and he says, I want what you have. And anyone who can look at these stones that'll turn things to gold and see nothing but the merest pebble, that's what I want.